My parents have been saving for my studies all my life. And then they just gave everything to my sister. You've always had a brain. You can handle it on your own, they said. And you know what? I did it. I remember the day my dream died like it happened yesterday. The whole world seemed to freeze as I sat at that kitchen table, listening to my parents discuss my future like I wasn't even in the room. It was supposed to be my moment, the moment where I would finally get everything I worked for, everything I earned, everything I deserved. But instead, it felt like the floor had just dropped out from under me. You know, your sister has always struggled with her confidence, Mom began, her voice soft and careful, as though choosing each word as delicately as one might handle a fragile piece of glass. She's always had a passion for fashion, and we think it's time for her to chase her dreams. Her words hung in the air, and I couldn't breathe. I was the one who had always been praised for my achievements. I was the one who aced every exam, who helped my classmates, who stayed up late studying because I knew my future depended on it. But now in this moment, it was as if all those years of hard work meant nothing. Mom's gaze shifted towards me, her eyes briefly meeting mine, but there was no warmth there, no acknowledgement of the hours I spent buried in textbooks, dreaming of the day I'd walk across the stage in a cap and gown. Instead, she turned back to my sister, who was sitting there wide-eyed and grinning, as though she were the one about to receive the greatest gift in the world. The greatest gift. I blinked, trying to process what I was hearing. Was this a joke? A mistake? Surely they weren't talking about my college fund. The one that had been growing for years. The one that was supposed to send me to the best university. They couldn't be. My sister Lily had always been, well, different from me. She wasn't like me, driven, focused. She had a good heart, but her dreams were different. Fashion design. She spent hours sketching dresses, cutting fabric, and sewing pieces together. It was something she loved, something she was passionate about, but it was never something that required years of work and a dedication to hard facts and numbers. And yet, here we were. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The words I had practiced over the years, the words I had imagined saying when I finally got my chance to fight for my future, vanished in the silence between us. It was my moment, my time to ask, to demand. But instead, I sat there, feeling smaller with each passing second. Dad, who had been quiet up until this point, finally looked at me. His gaze was distant, almost dismissive. You've always had a brain, son. You've always been able to figure things out. College isn't everything. Your sister needs this more than you do. And then it hit me. They had decided. They had made their choice. My whole life, I had been the good one. The one who followed the rules, who studied hard, who stayed out of trouble. I had been their golden child, the one they could always rely on to succeed. But apparently that wasn't enough. Apparently being smart, being capable, didn't matter anymore. I can handle it, I said, the words leaving my mouth before I could stop them. My voice didn't sound like my own. It was cold, distant, resigned. The truth was, I didn't believe that. I didn't know how I was supposed to handle it, but I had to. Thanks for believing in me, I added quietly, turning away from them. I didn't want to hear anything else. I didn't want to sit there and listen to their reasons, their justifications, but I couldn't walk away yet. There was one thing I needed to know. Are you really just giving it all to her? I asked, my voice wavering despite myself. What about me? What about my dreams? Mom's expression softened, but her answer was already clear. You've always been so independent. You don't need us to hold your hand. Lily needs this more than you do. We think this is the best decision for everyone. I could feel my chest tightening as I stood up from the table. I couldn't stay there anymore. I couldn't breathe in the same space with them, not when they were taking away everything I had worked for. I didn't say another word. I grabbed my jacket and walked out of the house, leaving the silence behind me. The world outside felt cold, the weight of what just happened pressing down on my shoulders like an invisible weight. I wanted to scream, to shout, to demand my future back. But instead, I did something else. I walked to the nearest bus stop and went straight to work. Flashback to when I was younger. The hours spent at my desk, my parents' praise ringing in my ears. You're the smart one, they'd always say. You'll be someone big one day. I believed them. I had to. I was the one who studied late into the night, the one who never missed a single exam, the one who stayed home while my sister went out with her friends, dreaming of a career in fashion. I wasn't like her. I didn't care about clothes or trends. I cared about math, about science, about logic. I was going to get into a top university, and I would show them all that my hard work paid off. But now it felt like that dream had been ripped away, and there was no way to fix it. The money that was supposed to send me to college was gone. My future was no longer in my hands. So I did what I had to do. I worked. Every night after a long day at my job, I'd come home, crack open my laptop, and start learning. I studied coding, IT, anything that could give me a leg up. My parents didn't understand. They thought I was wasting time. They didn't see the late nights, the hours I spent learning how to build websites, how to understand the tech world. They didn't see how I started my first online business, how I spent months building it from the ground up with no help from anyone. They didn't see that I was more than just a smart kid. The days blurred into weeks, then weeks turned into months. I buried myself in work, in learning, in building something, anything, that would prove I could make it, with or without the college degree that was supposed to define me. At night, I studied coding until my eyes burned. During the day, I worked at a job that barely paid enough to cover rent. But it didn't matter. I wasn't doing it for anyone but myself. I wasn't doing it for my parents, who had already written me off. And I certainly wasn't doing it for my sister, who, as I soon found out, was flourishing in her own world of fashion, her own dream funded by the college fund that should have been mine. I can still remember the first time I launched my website. It was a simple thing, a platform for freelancers to connect with small businesses. It wasn't revolutionary, but it was mine. I had built it from scratch, piecing it together from everything I had learned on my own. Every tutorial I watched late at night after coming home from my thankless job. I didn't sleep much. There was no time for that. Every waking moment was spent improving the site, learning how to market it, testing and tweaking it until it worked. And slowly I began to see results. The first client, then another. The first payment, the first breakthrough. It wasn't much, but it was something. And that something, that glimmer of hope, pushed me forward. Flashback to my sister, Lily, who had always been the problem child, the one who couldn't focus in school, the one who seemed to flounder in everything that didn't involve art or design. But as soon as she found out she was getting the college fund, things changed. Mom and Dad showered her with praise. "She's going to be the next big thing in fashion. I just know it," Dad would say, his voice full of pride. Meanwhile, I was stuck here trying to make sense of a world that felt determined to crush me under its weight. Lily went off to study in some prestigious fashion school, her face lighting up in excitement every time she got a new sketchbook or a fabric swatch. It was like I didn't even exist anymore. There she was, living the life I had dreamed of. And I, stuck in the shadow of my own lost dream, watched from a distance. But I wasn't bitter. Not exactly. I couldn't afford to be. I was too busy hustling, too busy proving that I could succeed on my own. The turning point came 2 years later when my website began to generate real income. It was nothing extraordinary, but it was enough for me to quit my job and work full-time on my business. The more I learned, the more I grew. I expanded into IT consulting, offered digital marketing services, and started developing software solutions for small businesses. With every deal, I got closer to the life I had always envisioned for myself, one where I didn't need a degree to succeed, where my brain and my ability to solve problems were enough. The first million came quietly, almost unexpectedly. One of my projects took off, and suddenly I found myself being courted by investors. I was in meetings with people who had the kind of power I never thought I'd have access to, people who had started businesses that became global empires. It didn't feel real, but then, as I signed contracts, shook hands with people who saw my potential, I realized this was it. I was a success, the kind of success I had only dreamed of when I was a kid. And as my empire grew, so did the distance between me and my parents. They still didn't understand. They still didn't believe in me. Every time I spoke to them, It was like they were living in some alternate reality, praising my sister and her future in fashion design. She's finally starting to make a name for herself, Mom would say, her voice full of hope. We're so proud of her. She's almost finished her course. She'll be the next big thing in fashion. I just know it. Meanwhile, I was building a business empire. But to them, it didn't matter. I was still just the kid who never needed their help. They never saw me as anything other than the smart one, the one who could make it on his own. Fast forward to a family dinner about 5 years later. Mom and Dad had invited me over for a special family dinner. I knew it wasn't really special. It was just another attempt to hold on to the idea that we were a happy family, all gathered around the table like we used to be. But I could see it in their eyes. They were proud of Lily. She was on the cusp of finishing her degree. She was going to be somebody in the fashion world. And me? I was still just the smart one who made things happen on his own, the one who had done it without the help of a fancy degree. So, Mom started casually, how's work going? I heard you signed a big deal. I nodded, trying not to feel the resentment bubbling up inside me. It's going well. Actually, things are really taking off. That's great. You've always been so independent. She smiled as if to pat me on the back for doing something they didn't even understand. But it was Dad who caught me off guard. You know, you've been a bit distant lately. I've been thinking about it, and maybe you're just jealous of your sister. I blinked, caught completely off guard. My jaw tightened, my grip on my fork suddenly feeling like it was made of steel. What? Lily is almost done with her fashion design course, he continued, ignoring my stunned silence. You know, she's got a real talent. You've always been the one who could figure things out on your own. But she's struggled her whole life. She deserves this. She's finally found her place. And you, his voice softened. You've always been so jealous of her. Jealous? Jealous of my sister, who was living a life funded by my dreams? Jealous of the one who got everything handed to her? I felt the anger rising in my chest, and for the first time in years, I felt the urge to stand up and shout. But instead, I clenched my fists under the table, forced myself to stay calm. I had everything they never thought I could achieve. I wasn't jealous of her, but I was angry. The night after that dinner, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed, my mind racing, replaying every word Dad had said. You've always been jealous of her. The more I thought about it, the more absurd it seemed. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. That little jab cut deeper than it should have. It wasn't the first time my parents had dismissed my accomplishments, but this time, it felt like a betrayal. I stood in front of the mirror that night, staring at the person looking back at me. 10 years of hard work, countless sleepless nights, endless hustle. And for what? So my parents could tell me I was jealous? So they could dismiss my achievements because they weren't the kind of success they understood? It wasn't jealousy I felt. It was something more complex. It was resentment, frustration, and the raw sting of being overlooked by the very people who were supposed to be my biggest supporters. But that moment, as painful as it was, did something to me. It lit a fire. The kind of fire that only comes from being pushed too far, from having your worth questioned by the people who should know better. A week later, I flew to New York for a major meeting with investors, one of the biggest of my career. It was an opportunity that could push my business to the next level. As I boarded the plane, I tried to push the anger out of my mind. I had a job to do. But when I landed, I didn't feel the rush of excitement I usually did when faced with these kinds of opportunities. Instead, I felt more determined than ever. I was going to show them all, my parents, my sister, everyone who ever doubted me, that I had done more than just to figure it out on my own. The meeting was intense. There were discussions of valuation, equity, and expansion. For 2 hours, I sat at that table, negotiating terms, feeling the weight of the moment. When the deal was finally sealed, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. It wasn't just the money that mattered. It was the validation. I had done it on my terms. The next few months were a blur of growth and scaling. My business exploded in ways I never could have imagined. I brought on partners, expanded to new markets, and started hiring people who were smarter and more experienced than I could have ever dreamed of being. Things were changing fast. I was a millionaire now, in ways that still felt surreal. But I wasn't done yet. I couldn't stop now. Not after everything I had been through. Not after all the doubts and sacrifices. This was only the beginning. Flashback to my sister. Lily was still the same, or so it seemed. She had finished her degree and landed a job in a high-end fashion house. Her life was moving forward, just like my parents had always hoped. But something didn't sit right with me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Lily's success, the one my parents had always praised, didn't seem to be as much of an accomplishment as they made it out to be. I dug a little deeper, asking around. What I uncovered was a mess of nepotism and connections. Lily's job wasn't a result of hard work, creativity, or dedication. It was because she knew people. She was living in a world that had been handed to her on a silver platter. And I had earned every step of mine. It wasn't a pleasant discovery, but it was one that solidified something in my mind. Lily hadn't really worked for anything, not like I had. It was at the next family dinner when the tension finally reached its breaking point. Mom and Dad were full of praise for Lily. As usual, they couldn't stop talking about her fashion career, her amazing future, the big things she was going to do. But this time, I didn't stay silent. Why does it always come back to her? I asked, my voice tight with emotion. Mom looked at me, startled by my sudden outburst. What do you mean, honey? You always talk about her like she's the only one who matters. I continued, not caring how bitter I sounded. It's like I'm invisible to you. Honey, that's not true, Dad said, trying to calm me down. We're proud of both of you. But I wasn't listening anymore. The anger, the years of neglect, and the hurt from the past finally poured out in a rush. You've always been proud of her, I said, my voice rising. You never even gave me the chance. You didn't believe in me. And then, when you handed her my college fund, you told me to figure it out on my own. Well, I did. I did more than that. I became something you never thought I could be. And now, you have the nerve to tell me I'm jealous of her? The room fell silent. I could see the hurt in my parents' eyes, but it didn't matter anymore. Not when I had spent years being pushed aside, made to feel like I wasn't enough. Like the only way to get their attention was to follow a path they approved of. Lily sat there, her face pale, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation, but not a word came out of her mouth. Maybe I'm not jealous, I added, my voice quieter now, but I'm damn tired of being invisible. That night, I made a decision. It wasn't just about proving something to my parents anymore. It wasn't about revenge either. It was about taking control of the situation once and for all. I was going to buy their house, and not just buy it. I was going to give them a taste of their own medicine. I had the power now. I had the money, the resources, and the leverage to make them see me for who I truly was. Not the smart kid who could always handle things, but the man who built something from nothing. It was time to flip the script. The decision had been made. I couldn't go back now. The next morning I started making calls. I had money, yes, but I also had connections. I knew exactly who to talk to and what steps to take. This wasn't going to be a quick, impulsive thing. I wanted it to be deliberate, calculated, something they would never forget. For the next couple of weeks, I went about my business. I flew around, signed papers, spoke with my financial advisors, and slowly but surely, I started the process of buying my parents' house. The house where I had grown up, the place that had once been my sanctuary and now felt like a symbol of all the things I had been denied. I hadn't told my parents yet. They were still oblivious to what was coming. I kept my distance, maintaining the facade of calmness that had been a part of me since I was young. I didn't want to give them any hints, not yet. Meanwhile, my sister's life seemed to be progressing as expected. She was on the verge of completing her fashion course, doing exactly what my parents had always dreamed of. Her life was easy. She was the golden child. I knew it wasn't fair, but I couldn't help but resent her for the way things had been handed to her. She hadn't struggled the way I had. She didn't have to prove herself to anyone, at least not the way I had. It was a crisp, clear evening when I finally called my parents over to dinner. I had everything ready. The house was mine. The deal had gone through. I wanted to make this moment count, to confront them, but also to show them who I had become, who I was now. They arrived as usual a bit late. Lily came in first, her eyes bright with the excitement of finishing her course. She was so proud of herself, and maybe a little proud of how far she had come, though she had no idea just how little she had really done. My parents walked in next, my mom beaming as always. She immediately hugged me, asking about my latest business venture, her voice warm, but I could sense the usual distance, that same coldness that had always lingered between us. It was as if I was always trying to prove something, and maybe I had been. We all sat down at the table. There was small talk, the usual polite conversation, but beneath it all, I could feel the tension rising. My mom, as usual, tried to bring up Lily's progress. "You should see her sketches. They're incredible," she said, her eyes fixed on my sister. "Yeah, I've seen them," I replied, my tone flat. I didn't want to acknowledge how much it hurt, but I was tired of hiding it. "You know, I was thinking," my dad suddenly said, clearing his throat, "Lily could use some help with her next collection. She might need an investor." He turned to me with a strange smile. "You could help her out, right?" It was the same old routine. Lily gets the praise, and I'm expected to be the supportive big brother, the one who always had his life figured out. But things were different now. I wasn't that person anymore. Instead of answering right away, I leaned back in my chair, taking a moment to savor the moment. Then I said, with more calm than I felt, "Actually, I've been thinking about something. It's time you knew what I've been working on." I could see their confusion, the way they tried to hide their surprise. "What do you mean?" my mom asked, her eyes narrowing, already sensing that something was different. "Do you remember that house, the one we've lived in for all these years?" I asked, my voice casual, though there was an undercurrent of tension. "Of course," my dad said, looking puzzled. "Why?" "Well," I said, "I bought it." There was a stunned silence. My mom's mouth dropped open. Lily looked at me, not understanding, her eyes flicking between me and my parents. "You bought it?" my mom repeated, her voice small, almost in disbelief. I nodded. "I thought it was time. After all these years, I finally made enough to do something meaningful with it. Something that shows you I'm not just the kid who figured it out. I'm the one who took everything you couldn't give me and turned it into something real." For a moment, the room was still. My parents didn't know how to react. My mom looked from me to the floor, then back at me, almost as if she didn't recognize the man sitting at the table. "What do you mean you bought it?" Lily asked, her voice cutting through the silence, confused. "I bought your house," I repeated slowly. "That's right. It's mine now." Lily stood up suddenly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "How could you do that? You've got everything already. You don't need this." "Actually," I said, looking straight at her, "I needed this more than you'll ever understand." My mom tried to speak, but her words faltered. She opened her mouth again, but nothing came out. She was processing what I had said, trying to make sense of it. But there was no making sense of it. No excuse that could take away the years of pain. "I did what you couldn't," I said quietly but firmly. "I proved it to myself, and now I'm proving it to you." I could see their pride cracking, the illusion of their perfect family beginning to shatter, and I couldn't bring myself to care. They needed to understand the cost of what they had done, of what they had never given me. The dinner ended quickly after that. There were no more pleasantries, no more talk of Lily's future. The mood had soured. I could see my parents were upset, but I wasn't going to apologize for it. This was the result of their choices. The weight of it all, the years of comparison, the favoritism, the dismissal, had finally hit them. I knew they would come around. They had no choice but to acknowledge who I was now, even if they didn't want to. And as I watched them leave, I realized something. I wasn't doing this for their approval. I had already proved everything I needed to prove to myself. This was for me. This was the moment when I finally took control, and it felt damn good. The days that followed that dinner were nothing short of surreal. My parents barely spoke to me, and when they did, their voices were distant, guarded. They kept trying to make sense of what had happened, but the reality was simple. I had done something they could never have predicted, and it left them reeling. My sister? She was silent. I knew her well enough to understand that she didn't know how to handle it either. She had always been the center of attention, the one who could do no wrong. And now, with the house no longer in their hands, with the very thing they had taken for granted now in my possession, I could feel the shift. She knew she could never have that back. She'd spent her entire life being the golden child, the one who had never been asked to prove herself, the one who always had the opportunities handed to her. It wasn't jealousy, it was reality. I had earned everything I had, from scratch, without their help. It wasn't even about the money anymore. It was about the power to make decisions for myself, to shape my future, without needing their validation. But the most important part of this whole equation was what was to come next. I had already bought their house, and that wasn't enough. There was something deeper, something they still needed to understand. It was a few weeks later when I got the call. "Are you coming over for dinner?" My mom's voice was softer now, almost tentative. "Your father and I, we want to talk." I had been expecting it. They wanted to fix things. They were trying to find a way to make amends without admitting they were wrong. Typical. They couldn't just say it outright, could they? That would be too much like humility. But that was exactly what I wanted from them. I agreed to meet them, and when I arrived at their house, I was struck by how much it had changed. The walls, the furniture, it all looked like something from a past life. It no longer felt like home. And as I walked in, I realized I had outgrown this place long ago. They had set the table, trying to make it look like old times. My dad was there, looking at me with a strange mixture of pride and regret in his eyes. My mom, though, seemed distant, like she didn't know how to face me. Lily wasn't there. I hadn't expected her to be. "Son, I don't know where to start," my dad said, looking down at his plate. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, and maybe we didn't do right by you." There it was, the first crack, the admission they'd been too proud to make. I stayed silent, watching him, waiting for him to continue. "I've always been proud of you," he went on, his voice wavering slightly. "But I see now, we pushed you aside. We didn't mean to, but we did. We made mistakes. This wasn't what I wanted. I didn't need them to tell me they made mistakes. I needed them to understand why they had made them, why they had chosen Lily over me, why they had assumed I would always be fine, that I would always figure it out on my own. They had never given me the respect I deserved, never acknowledged my potential. They had always pushed me down in favor of her, and that was something I would never forget." "I understand," I said, my voice steady, though the weight of everything I'd carried for so long was starting to take its toll on me. "But you know what? It doesn't change anything. You didn't believe in me when I needed it the most, and now I'm the one who holds the power." That wasn't easy to say, but it was the truth. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about everything, every rejection. Every time they told me I didn't need their help because I had it in me. Every time they turned a blind eye to the fact that I had worked harder than anyone for what I had. Every moment they spent looking at Lily like she was the one who deserved more. I paused, letting the words sink in. This was the part where they would either face their actions or ignore them. But I knew I was done with them, pretending everything had been fine. My mom spoke next, her voice quieter now. "We're sorry, but we just don't understand why you're doing this." "Because I can," I said simply. "Because you never let me. And now, I don't need you to." My dad nodded slowly, absorbing the gravity of what I was saying. I could see it in his eyes. He understood, even if he didn't want to admit it. It hurt him to hear this, but it was a truth he had to hear. The conversation turned awkward after that. My mom was trying to figure out how to make this better, how to fix things, but it was too late. They had already given me everything I needed. The drive, the independence, the hunger to succeed. What they hadn't given me was the love and belief I had craved for so long. And now I was the one holding all the cards. When the dinner ended, I stood up to leave, but before I could walk out the door, I turned to them one last time. "I bought the house, remember?" I said, my words deliberate, cutting through the silence. "And I'm not just buying a house, I'm buying freedom. Freedom from your expectations, from your favoritism. I'm doing it for me." With that, I walked out, leaving them behind. I could hear my mom calling after me, but I didn't look back. The next day I went through with it. I signed the papers, officially purchasing my parents' house, and just like that, I had taken control of my life. Not just with money, but with the power to shape my future the way I saw fit. But that wasn't the end of it. The real lesson was not about the house or the money, or even the career I had built. The real lesson was about understanding my worth, finally seeing myself as the person I had always been, the one who didn't need anyone's approval. And when I handed over the keys to my parents, I knew they would never forget the lesson. But more importantly, I knew I would never forget who I had become.